Welcome to Maine, we're stretched to the bone. Prices keep rising, the paycheck stays prone. Inflation keeps knocking, won't leave us alone. They're selling the lie, groceries climbing, the gas tank is low. The bill's hitting harder than snow, but silence still blankets the truth. Where does it go? They're selling the lie. Housing is gridlocked from Portland to the county. Workers commute far past what feels soundly. Talk of solution comes yearly, not loudly. They're selling the lie. They're selling the lie. Say every voice counts, but watch who gets lifted. Some stories vanish, some get the spotlight shifted. Depends on what trends and what keeps them gifted. They're selling the lie. I won't believe them, I wanna believe, but truth's always stuck in between. Static and spin, drown the signal again. Nothing is what it seems. I wanna believe you, but every headline turns daylight into redesigned skies. Facts get twisted, context missing. We choke on the simplified alibis. Wanna believe you, but all I see is shadows where the answers should shine. The fact is fiction.
Welcome to the Muddy Waters Podcast, where Mainers tell their stories, unfiltered.
Good morning, Maine. This is Chuck Ellis, and I am the host of the Muddy Waters Podcast, your swamp guide, if you will, helping you navigate Maine politics, understand what's going on. Unfortunately, as I always like to point out, the mainstream media has become a propaganda arm of the Democrat Party without any interest in informing the people of what's actually going on, which is why so many people are in the dark, and which is why it's so important for us to have sources like the Maine Wire, Unquire, Maine X Community, Southern Maine Republic, and another number of these other organizations that are putting out information, trying to set the record straight and help people better understand what's going on. And I do that through having interviews with people from around the state who are seeing what's happening on the ground, and try to keep people informed about what's really happening. Today, fortunately, we are blessed to have with us William Austin, who is a campaign manager, I believe is the official title for the Robert Wessels campaign. But also, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, the Wessels campaign worked really hard to try and get Janet Beaudoin elected in Lewiston. So thank you for joining us, William.
Yeah, and thank you, Chuck. Thank you for having me on the podcast. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, like I said, you guys are doing some great stuff, not just for your own campaign, but last year, I remember, was it last year? Geez, 2 years ago when I was running for House, but also I was trying to get a candidate on the school board. Robert came around with me, going door to door to try to help me get signatures. Obviously, he's talking about himself as well, but he was coming around. Going door to door is tough to do alone, and so I was appreciative of him joining me, taking entering into that with me, and just his willingness to go door to door with other people, especially when he was trying to do something for himself and try to help get a school board candidate elected in Westbrook, Maine, which a lot of people have gotten. Westbrook isn't Portland, but a lot of people don't have a lot of hope for Westbrook. And so I really appreciate that. And that's something that's been a distinctive of his campaign and who he is all throughout. So obviously very, very appreciative of that. But yeah, so I obviously wanted to have you guys on because you guys did a lot with that campaign. So, but before we get into that, because there's a bunch of fun stuff there, I think, and we've labeled this "Get Out the Vote." Sometimes we as Republicans would rather use the acronym that a lot of people don't know what it means. So I actually spelled it out rather than saying GOTV. I said "Get Out the Vote" because a lot of people don't remember all the acronyms. So we want to talk about "Get Out the Vote," but before we get into that stuff, and some of the observations you have from your assistants. Who are you? Where do you come from? why, and then and why, and this is not, I don't want the short version, like go into detail, right? Like what caused you to come to Maine, to, because spoiler alert, he's not from Maine, and work on the Robert Wessels campaign. It must have been the money. That's what I'm assuming.
Yeah, no, Chuck, it was not about the money. I'm a full-time volunteer on the Wessels campaign, ultimately because I believe Robert Wessels is the real deal. I believe Robert Wessels is a genuine man, and I believe ultimately he is the only Republican in running who can actually flip this state and flip it red. But yeah, so I'm from the Midwest, and ultimately I grew up in a little farm town, and I worked on a farm for about 9 or 10 years. During that time, I studied politics just for fun, and I really didn't get my start into political career until really until this campaign. I'd been what you would call an outsider in politics, and I'd worked on a couple campaigns in Illinois, but not really anything big. I just studied it from afar, and so that's ultimately where I'm coming from. I worked on a farm, and I went to an engineering college. I did that for 2 years, and I put that on pause to help Robert with his campaign. Fun fact: Robert is actually his dad is the farmer I worked for, and so that's the connection we have there. And so my ties with Robert go way back, and Robert is a genuine man, and ultimately I wouldn't be volunteering if that weren't the case. We share the same political beliefs, and I believe that he is the only Republican candidate who can actually win in 2026.
Yeah, oh, that's a bold statement. So you're not saying he's the Republican candidate you believe that has the best chance. You're saying that you don't believe any of the other Republican candidates have a chance.
Yeah, yeah, and so I think that all goes back to what our beliefs are and what we intend to do for the state. Obviously, we've all got similar ideology or similar beliefs in as far as what the problems are and what we believe we should have for a solution. But what sets Robert apart, I think, really is his approach to campaigning. Obviously, you saw we helped you with your campaign. Robert did a year back, and we helped Janet Beaudoin with hers. We are really big on the voter ID and red flag bills that are referendums that were done in November. And really, it's not about Robert. This campaign is not about Robert. It's about Maine, and that's what really drew me to this: is his humility and his approach to campaigning. And quite frankly, it's different than I've ever seen before on the campaign trail. I mean, I've studied politics for a while. I haven't been in it, but I've studied it for quite a while. And his campaign is really just unique and different. And so whenever you unite as a team, whenever you actually join forces with your House, your Senate races, your local races, that's what we need as a Republican unified effort going forth. And that's what makes the Wessels campaign so special, and why I believe we ultimately have the best chance and the only chance, I believe, to flip this state red.
Yeah, well, I'll go on the record and say I do think that there are some other candidates, and I think that there's hope of a Republican candidate getting elected this year, even if it's not the Wessels campaign. But I
hope you're right if he's not.
I appreciate definitely your optimism, and I think belief in Robert Wessels. Again, he's definitely a man of character, and we appreciate that. I'm appreciative of a number of the candidates. I won't go into detail. I'm not gonna. Honestly, I'd be happy to have any of the Republican candidates over against any of the Democrat or independent candidates.
Totally
and
agree.
I think as you've kind of said, from a policy standpoint, I think that meant that there's a huge amount of overlap in what our Republican gubernatorial candidates bring to the table, and I'm very appreciative of. And I'm not making any endorsements, just for the record, just in case anybody's wondering. This is not happening. I've been very clear about that with everyone. I have my own views and values, and I'll vote in a particular way, but I really want to make sure everybody gets heard, and that my voice doesn't get in the way of people being able to make their own decisions. So, what I would say, actually, what I want to go into. So, I think it's worth noting, like, that you're willing to give up. You clearly this man through his dad, and you're willing to sacrifice your time and be a volunteer For how long have you been in Maine so far at this point?
So at this point, I've been in Maine on the ground running for about 7 months now, and
Okay.
so
And how many more months? Another 7, 9,
yeah. So
9,
ultimately, we've got
8.
till November, so 8 months or so.
Yeah. So you're
But
giving up 15 months of your life for this campaign.
you could say that, or you could say I'm giving back 15 months of my life, because ultimately this campaign has been an amazing learning experience, and ultimately it's really helped me grow as far as what I can do, and really just see the world through a different lens. And it's really been neat to connect with people on the ground here in Maine, and really just bring a sense of hope and a sense of encouragement to the people of Maine, because ultimately I have people coming up to me and they say thank you for having Robert step up and doing what he's doing. And really that's what fuels me and keeps me going, is just the everyday people who say, we love what you're doing, keep going. And that's ultimately why I really enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's obviously really encouraging. I remember it's frustrating going to doors and talking to people that are a little bit more negative, but when you get like one yes, it's
Yeah.
huge. One encouragement or or more. I've done a lot of door to door in my time. I might do that for work part time right now, outside of politics, but so I've got a lot of experience with that. But yeah, so I think that's really encouraging for sure. So tell us about like one of the reasons I wanted to have you come on, and I want to get into some other stuff as well, but like I want to talk about the Janet Beaudoin campaign for Lewiston. It's House night. Was it 94?
94. Yep, it was 94.
House District 94. So what happened? How did Team Wessels get into like going and knocking doors? What was what happened there?
Yeah, so ultimately, we joined on really door knocking for probably the previous 2 weeks prior to the election. For those of you, I'll enlighten your viewers here. Those of you who are not aware, Janet Beaudoin had a special election February 26th, if I remember correctly, against Scott Harriman, who's a Lewiston city councilor who is running for the Democratic nominee. And Janet Beaudoin lost 47 to 53, if I remember correctly. But ultimately, we joined for door knocking about 2 weeks prior and had door knocked probably over 700 doors. And then what we really got into about 2 or 3 days before the election, I found out that she really didn't have a get out the vote team for the day of and the day before, because that's whenever you're going to really shift people from the, oh, I like Janet Beaudoin, to actually getting out and voting for her. That's whenever you need that effort really going into it. And so that's when we got into it. And we had about, I want to say 25 to 30 volunteers making phone calls, making texts saying, hey, are you getting out to vote? And so we probably called over 1,200 people, texted probably over 1,500 people with those efforts, because ultimately that's where it's at. We need that door knocking, we need that texting, we need that phone calling to actually motivate people to get off the couch and actually get into action.
Yeah, absolutely. And so like this is one of the things that the Republican Party largely hasn't done as well over against the Democrat Party. Our Get Out the Vote program has, I think we see it in like voter turnout, where you have higher voter turnout from Democrats than we do from Republicans. And I think, and then the things that you hear about now, they have a lot more money because they've got Soros funding them and all that other kind of stuff.
Sure.
And so we've got to compete against that. But the reality is, like, there are things that we could do, and it sounds like you guys are doing, to help encourage people to get out to vote. And what's crazy is you said they called like 1,500 people. Was that the number?
Yep.
Called, texted, or whatever. And how many total people showed up to vote in the election?
So ultimately we had, if I remember correctly, just over 1,000. I think it was 1,060 or something. And so ultimately we won in day of election. Where we really got beat was absentee ballots. And so I think if we had focused on absentee ballots, if we had actually started registering people to get their absentee ballots and then picked them up with the notary, I believe we would have won that election. So yeah, I guess your question was we had over 1,000 people vote.
Not for us, but there were about.
Oh, okay.
I think it was
Yeah.
like somewhere around 1,100 total votes.
Yes, 1,100 total votes, and then
we got
had
about
just
a little
over
over
500.
just over
Yep.
500. So, and I think this is important to note because this is an election that,
Yeah.
like, obviously either party, if they just got out the vote, like, essentially better, could easily win, right? Now, I think comparatively, you have some numbers to show that, like, with this, we did better than we historically do in special elections. And I think a lot of that goes to Janet Beaudoin being a really high quality candidate and
Janet
being
Beaudoin
well
is
known
one of the best
in the community.
Yeah. I believe she's probably one of the best candidates qualified for that district. Ultimately, she's got the name recognition for being on the school board. Scott Harriman is quite honestly a terrible candidate. So I was really disappointed there, but you had a lot of people too who were voting for Janet because they really didn't want Scott. And so I think that helped her too.
Yeah, but the point is, like, if half of the people that you had reached out to showed up to vote, because you're reaching out to Republicans, right?
Yes.
Primarily. So if half of them had showed up to vote, we win that election.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. So it's like this is one of those things where there are a couple of things to say. Like, one part of the problem is, like, the mainstream media. I'm going to highlight them again. They're not informing the people. Like, they're not encouraging and making sure that the people of Lewiston are showing up to vote. Right. Like they're not, because people are not paying. People are too focused on what's happening in Washington, D.C., or today what's happening in Iran, to pay attention to what's happening in their backyard. And, if we had been able to pick up this seat, it makes it that much more difficult for the Democrats to put forward, like, the insane policy that they are, continuing to advance in Augusta. And we couldn't get our Republicans out to vote. There are a couple of notes to think about here. And I was thinking about this a lot recently, because trying to understand, like, the Democrat Party nationally, for instance, has the worst approval rating I think it's ever had. I think at one point it dipped under 30% or something along those lines into the 20s, and people are like, the Democrat Party is dying, right? And this is Republicans. We're excited, right? So I decided to do some research, right?
Sure.
Our approval rating's not much better, just to be completely honest. The Republican Party's approval rating is in the mid 30s, maybe as high as 40, but it's not high, right?
No,
I think last I checked, it was like 30, right around 30% for the Democrats, 35% for the Republicans. If they're dead, then we're dying. Okay, right. Like, this is a reality that a big part of why people don't show up to vote. Number one, they're not educated. They're not informed on what's actually happening, because the mainstream media, and when I say the mainstream media, I mean, I include all the local newspapers and the local television stations, outside of, obviously, the Maine Wire, that actually focuses on this stuff primarily. They do talk about some national stuff, but primarily they're talking about what's going on here in our state, which I greatly appreciate. Outside of that, most of the emphasis is on what's happening in Washington. So we're not being appropriately educated, but also we as a Republican Party have to do better at establishing trust with the voters of Maine. And I think that is one of the reasons that people don't show up and vote for us. And here we are in a situation where this is what the GOP just typically would do, right? I think it looks to me. We'd be mad at our voters for not showing up to vote. Now, the question is, does that encourage them to show up to vote?
Yeah, no, not really.
Right.
Yeah. No, you go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, I think we need to get better at, like, encouraging people and saying, hey, we need you, right? Like, that's the reality. We need you. Please help us. Because, like, we don't want our state to get worse. And I think, like, I think the reality is, in 2024, right? Another example of this is Trump, won CD2 pretty handily, and somewhere over 10,000, or it might have been even more than that, but at least 10,000, maybe 15,000, 16,000 people voted for Trump and didn't vote for any other Republican down the ticket. And the reason behind that has to do with the fact that people vote for candidates they like and trust, right? But also that they they vote for, they're not in love with the Republican Party, right? Because if they love the Republican Party and we're all about what we're doing, they would vote Republican all the way down, but they didn't. They liked Trump, right? And so we need to, do better at educating our voters on the candidates and the people that are coming up and down the aisle, which is partly what I try to do here by inviting people to come on. So if you're a candidate at home and you're running and you're like, I want people to make sure, I'd love to have you on. And so like that's where this type of thing comes in, but we need to do a better job of getting information out in front of voters about and asking for their to vote, not expecting their vote. And I think that's because we still have to win votes even from people in our own party. Like that's the reality. Just because they're a Republican doesn't mean they're going to vote for a Republican, because not everybody is part of the cult of the Republican, in politics, right? Some people are just dyed in the wool. They're either Democrats or they're Republicans, and they're going to vote straight up and down the ticket. Here in the state of Maine, in particular, where like either the biggest party or the second biggest party is the independent vote. Even within the parties, a significant portion of people. I was at some doors recently for this other thing that I'm doing with Democrats who are definitely going to vote for Susan Collins, but definitely didn't vote for Donald Trump. These people are not, their vote is not guaranteed. They could vote for a Democrat or a Republican in the gubernatorial race, right? And their votes can be won, but even within their own party. But there are also Republicans that I know that are in that same category. So anyway, I think it's important to note these types of things, and like the efforts of trying to get out the vote, like what you guys did with Janet. Though it was unsuccessful, this is not an opportunity to blame our voters for not showing up to vote, but it's an opportunity to ask ourselves, what do we need to do differently to more effectively encourage voters to turn up and vote for us? Does that make sense?
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'll add too that a primaries or a general election is far different than a special election. Really, the job we had about 19% of our voters turn out. Total. I don't know the breakdown between Democrats and Republicans, but the fact of the matter is this was a low turnout election. And so we need to do a better job at educating the public actually that there is a special election, because ultimately I had so many people who said, oh, I didn't even know there was a special election today, or that's today. I thought that was a week out. Well, we need to ensure that our end is not the reason that they're not voting. At the very least, we need to inform them that there was an election, because I would say probably half the doors that I door knocked and that people actually talked with me, they had no idea there was a special election going on. And so, let alone the fact that they knew Janet Beaudoin was the candidate they should choose, they didn't know that there was one to vote on. And so we need to ensure that our end actually puts forth the effort to show them that there is a special election going on.
Absolutely. Yeah. We need to do a better job of getting our people to know what's going on. Absolutely. That's on us. We can't rely on the mainstream media. We can't rely on people seeking out information. We need to be the ones putting that information in front of people, and we need to work hard at that. So I appreciate you guys taking the time and working on her campaign. So obviously that's one of the things that you learned, but what are some other things? What goes into, like, as you're a campaign manager and you're thinking about this for the Wessels campaign, especially with the upcoming primary, like what goes into a get out the vote effort? What are the elements that you need to be focused on? And where in particular, like give like a brief bullet pointed, if you can, brief-ish bullet pointed overview, and then like what are some areas where you feel like we can improve as a party in that process?
Absolutely. So first of all, I'll say that this was really great as a training opportunity for my people. Most of these people have never done an effort like this. We had some skilled people on the phones, but we also had a ton of people who this was their first time doing something. And so I think that this was really great to actually teach them how to do something like this. But really, I would say there's probably 3 different aspects of a ground game. We didn't get the last one, but I would say one is data. You've got to figure out who your voters are that are actually going to consider voting, and consider voting for Janet versus Scott. because the simple fact of the matter is I'm not particularly fond of informing a Scott Harriman voter that there's a special election today. Sorry, that's the blunt truth.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then the second aspect I would say is really contact. And that's where you've got your doors, your texts, your phone services, all of that. That's the visual and the visible aspect of a ground game. And then you've got your calendar, you've got your absentee ballot tracking, you've got your ballot chasing, which basically means and we failed at this aspect entirely because we launched about 2 days prior to her actual vote. But you've got to get out the vote for absentee ballots. You've got to go around, and if they're not willing to actually vote on election day, and you have the data to show that they're probably not going to vote, you need to try and get them an absentee ballot so that they can actually vote. Because the fact of the matter is, 19% of the vote isn't going to cut it. We were down about 120 absentee ballots compared to the Democrats. We had, I think, 150. Don't quote me on this, but we had about 150 absentee ballots that we believe voted for Janet, and then we had about 300 plus some that voted for Scott. And so I'll give the Democrats credit; they are very good at getting a grounds force together and churning out those absentee ballots. And we've simply got to do better at that. That's where we lost, and that's one of the things that we're going to be working towards in the primary, and then especially in the general election in November, because I think the absentee ballots are really where it's at.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the difference between 2020 for Trump and 2024, now obviously there's plenty of conversation about like cheating and blah. Let's table that for a moment. But like,
Sure.
I think that the Trump administration would also claim that there was a large amount of cheating that was done in 2024 as well. But that's why they had the perspective of we've got to swamp the vote. We've got to make it too big to rig. And so the Trump administration aggressively pursued absentee ballots. So
yeah,
and trying to make as recognizing that this is what we have to do in order to be able to win. And I think we haven't done it as good of a job. There are some areas. Like in my county, Cumberland County, we have a one of the towns in particular that's got a pretty good get out the vote program. But in general, I think holistically, it's an area that we have struggled in, and partly it's like ideological. People are against absentee ballots on the Republican side, and I get it, right? Like my perspective would be like I would love to have only in-person paper ballots hand counted, right? Like that would be outside of extenuating circumstances, obviously military personnel, people with disabilities that don't have the ability to get in, elderly, or somebody who's definitely going to be out of town for a work-related thing, right? That's what absentee balloting used to be for, right? That's what it was designed for. But this like mass, everybody gets to do it. I don't think that really ultimately benefits our society. I do think, though, in the current environment, we have to take advantage of the tools that are available to us because the other side is using them. And as you've pointed out, on election day, we won. But we lost the absentee ballot. And there's a lot of data that we have access to within the party to say, these people are low propensity voters, but they're Republicans, right? We can get a pretty good sense that, hey, if we can get to their door, if we can help them, fill out the stuff to be able to get the absentee ballot, that once they get the absentee ballot, we can go to their door as a notary public, collect their filled out ballot, bring it and drop it off. Notaries can carry up to 5 of those at a time. We can actually increase the number of votes. And in some of the cases here in the state of Maine, we had people lose by less than 100 votes. And it's like, when you think about that, this can swing control in the House and the Senate in Maine and could help us win the governor's race. And so this has to be part of our tactic if we're going to be able to win. I think it's a really big blind spot that we have as a party. I think that there are other elements. I think some people believe that, for instance, social media is not important, and a lot less important. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I do think that it's not as important as, I would say it's not as important as get out the vote programs, but I do think it has a place at shifting culture a little bit more over time, which is part of the reason I do this. Obviously, I wouldn't do it if I thought it was useless and a waste of time. But it's not going to change this election, if that makes sense, for the most part.
No, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I'll add too that Republicans fail at this, and I think we should be taking some cues from Democrats. I mean, ultimately, they've got a great ground game. We played in Maine People's Alliance's backyard. I probably saw 4 or 5 different canvassers out on election day going around. And so to all you political operatives out there watching this, take some notes from Maine People's Alliance. They might be our political enemies, but ultimately they've got good get out the vote efforts, and I think we need to copy a good idea, just maybe not their policies.
Yeah, their politics are bad, but their get out the vote efforts are good. So and I think you're right. It's a really great point, but that's also another thing that's worth noting, right? So unfortunately, some people are going to look at this and be like, we're congratulating ourselves for losing again. But the reality is, there was some progress made. I think we did better at getting out the vote in this special election than we did in a while. I think you had some statistics to show.
Yeah. So basically, I've been looking at the past special election. Well, sorry, the past elections for District 94. And so basically, what I've come up with is before the redistricting, it was about 60% to 40%. After the redistricting, it was about 60% to 40%. The cycle 2024, it was 69% to 41. 59 to 41. And now we shifted it down to 53% to 47%. And so that's within competitive race distance. We lost by 69 votes was the total amount that we lost by. So if we had a get out the vote effort with absentee ballots, if we'd been able to match them, we would have won this election. And that's on us as political operatives, not necessarily the people of Maine. And we've got to do better as far as getting a field team out. One thing, though, I do want to point out is that, and I'm not saying this to sound defeatist, but one thing nationally, the Democrats since January of 2025 have shifted the entire race average by about 5.6 points to the blue side. And so for us to shift that 14 points red, that's huge, because nationally, the Republicans aren't doing quite as well as we're doing during the 2024 Trump election. And so I think that's really critical to point out, that we have the opportunity here to shift the entire state red if we have good get out the vote efforts.
Yeah, I mean, again, you made the comment that if we match them with absentee ballots, but we don't even need to do that, right? We win on election day, we just need to do better, right? And we need to have a more comprehensive plan. Hopefully, I'll have Janet on to talk more about things from her perspective. She's not done. We're very thankful.
No.
She's running. She's already got her signatures, and she's on the ballot for November for the very same seat. It would have been nice to get her in sooner, but we're hopeful that she'll be able to work hard and get herself in there in November. So a couple other things that I feel like are worth talking about. Obviously, again, that's a huge thing. Again, get out the vote. That's one of the biggest, most important things. We need to court our people, get them out to vote, and ask people to vote, not push people to vote, if that makes sense. But I think that doing that, those efforts of making phone calls and showing up to people's houses and using the data available to us, these are all things that are within our control. Again, one of the things that you mentioned is that your campaign and what you did was fully volunteer driven. People were not getting paid to do this, right?
Mhm. Correct.
And that you had over 20 people that were working on that campaign. And so if you're out there and you care about politics, like this is something we need people like you to volunteer. And so for your local candidates or gubernatorial candidates, whoever it might be, because we need your help in order to be able to win. And I think that's something that we need to do. We as a party, I think, need to do a better job of inviting people into and asking people to help us as another thing. So, one of the other things that I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about, if I can remember, my brain just went to mush. Where no idea.
You're not the only one in this. You're not the only one in this that their brains turn to mush.
Yeah. What was the okay? So obviously there's some recent polling that has come out.
Sure.
From UNH, and there are some interesting takeaways that I have from that regarding like who's in the lead for the gubernatorial races and things like that. And it was interesting to know what percentage did Robert have on that list?
Don't quote me on it, but I believe we had around 4%, which, given the fact that we have 0 ads, I believe that's pretty impressive. We've not done any ads or whatnot as far as TV ads. I know a couple that I can think of directly, Mason and Midgley, both have done TV ads for quite some time now, have poured hundreds of thousands into that. And so the simple fact that we are getting along without any big money, I think, is very impressive. We've got a long ways to go to make up some ground, but the reality is at this point, a lot of people didn't think we'd get our signatures in as quickly. A lot of people didn't think that we would even be at this place. And so I think the real challenge now is simply getting into a competitive zone right now.
Yeah. 100%. I think he might have done a little bit better than you. I think he might have been as high as 6%, but I'm trying to find the detail on that. Robert, on the Republican side, where are we? Oh no, you're absolutely right. 4%. Okay. I thought it had been a bit higher, but nope, it's 4. So yeah, and as you said, some other people are spending a lot of money, and I think for many that was a little bit of a surprise, because as we've talked about before, one of the biggest things that he's up against is like with not spending money, and I think people are concerned that like he's not going to be able to show up in the polls, and Robert is commenting himself. We're ranked number 5 at 4%. Yeah, which I think, given the amount of again, I was impressed as I noted when I had Robert on the podcast to announce that you guys had been the first campaign and possibly a record-breaking time frame of getting your signatures collected and getting on the ballot, despite the mainstream media instead highlighting Nirav Shah, whose policies led to people dying in nursing homes alone without their families. That guy, they wanted to focus on him rather than the first person who had kind of broken a record and getting on the ballot. It's very impressive what the campaign has been able to do without money, and I think that needs to be applauded. And it did kind of, I wasn't sure where it would come up in the poll, but one of the things that I think is the most interesting about this poll is how unknown most of the candidates are. So if you look at under the favorability segment, right under where it tells people like what percentages the different candidates are at, number 1 actually we'll go to is that the highest thing that people picked on which gubernatorial candidate was their first choice was don't know, undecided at 31%, with obviously Bobby Charles at 28%, then Mason at 12%, Jones at 7%, Midgley at 6%, Bush at 5%, Wessels 4%, Libby 2%, and Owen McCarthy 1%. So like that's interesting. But the biggest one is the don't know undecided, right? And like I think that's significant, but also it's when you look at like under the favorability, Bobby Charles is in the best situation in being known in the state with 38% of the people who are polled that don't know enough to say whether or not they like him or are neutral or unfavorable. So basically 38% of people don't even know who he is. And that's the best, right? So with some candidates as high as 79% not being known. And so what you see on the Republican side is that our constituents don't know much about our candidates versus the Democrat side, and where their lowest of their top 5 is 37% unknown, but they've got 22, 21, 27, for their other candidates being unknown, which means their candidates are a lot better known by their constituents, by likely Democrat primary voters. And so I think that's really fascinating. Part of that plays into the mainstream media and how they cover the Democrats and they don't cover the Republicans, but it also suggests that this is a wide open race.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. And I'll add too that a lot of the things are, well, everyone has so many great candidates out there that they fail to actually talk about what sets each candidate apart. We all agree on the problems. I think we all agree what the problems are, where we differ, and not even majorly, but where we differ are on what our solutions are. But a lot of people just aren't informed as to what our solutions are and what sets each individual candidate apart. Another thing too is all of these Democrats, they've been big names. They've been what you would call common political names. Narav Shah was, as you know, head of the CDC during COVID. He was the face of the opposition during the Mills reign of terror, so to speak. And then you have Shenna Bellows, who obviously as Secretary of State has played a very visible role in terms of ballots and voter ID and whatnot and fraud there. And then you've got you've got Troy Jackson. Even I would say he's probably a smaller contender, so to speak. But even he's Senate Majority Leader. And so I think all of that to say, I think all of these people, they're already well known and you've already made up your mind about them. Whereas the Republican side of things, apart from Bobby Charles, most people haven't ever met these candidates. Most people don't know their back history, their political story. Whereas all the Democrats, everything has already been known. People have already decided at this point who they like and who they don't. And so I think that's the real takeaway there.
Yeah, no, those are all really good points. You've got a bunch of Augusta insiders running on one side.
Yeah.
And you do have some we call it Augusta insiders, people who have served in the Senate in particular, and the House running on the Republican side, but you also have a lot of people that are out from the outside. And so theirs are mostly, insiders and Nirav Shah. So first of all, like let's say that like polls, UNH polls, no offense to UNH, but they don't tend to be a good barometer of reality. But there are some things that we can, like what we've been talking about is taking away from, are things that we can take away from it. Right. And one of the reasons I say they're not in touch with reality is because this is the same outfit that did polling leading up to the yes on one and no on two. I call them yes on one and no on two campaigns, but voter ID, trying to establish voter ID and trying to stop the red flag laws. And their poll had us barely losing yes on one and barely winning no on two. And we lost both of them like basically 2-1. Right. So that's like over a 20-point swing. And so it's hard to give too much credit and get too excited or upset or whatever about what's coming out of these polls. But there are some things, again, that we can take away, such as the fact that, like, I think Robert's doing better than many people thought that he would do. And that there's a lot, like, most of the people are undecided. I shouldn't say most of the people, but many people are undecided, and most people do not know who the candidates are, despite all of the debates that have been put on and stuff like that. I think the reality is, like, outside of political insiders on the Republican side, our people don't start thinking about this type of stuff. They're not going to think about a primary election until probably April at the earliest, and potentially not until May, right? It's like, okay, now I got to figure out who I'm going to vote for, right? This is when they start thinking about it, because this so far in advance is not something that I think our Maine Republican average, Maine Republicans are as interested in. I mean, I've been in state committee meetings where people who are part of the Republican Party don't know who all the candidates are. They're like, they know Bobby Charles, and they know David Jones, and they know Robert Wessels, but they didn't know a number of the other candidates. And I think, partly because, I think that there's a lot of candidates, but also because, like, people are not as aware of what's happening. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity still. This is a wide open race. Bobby Charles is currently the front runner, as he has said. I think that is also consistent with what I think to be reality. But I think it's ultimately a wide open race.
Yeah, and I'll add too, though, Bobby Charles is the front runner right now. But the thing that he has is everyone knows Bobby Charles. I've been door knocking. Everyone knows whether they like or they don't like Bobby Charles. So the reality is, at this point, Bobby Charles wants to get this game over as quickly as possible. All the others are simply catching up to him and surpassing him, because the reality is, at this point, Bobby has reached saturation where everyone knows enough about who he is to determine whether or not they like him. And so all the rest of us, especially Robert Wessels, what we're working on right now is getting in front of the voters, making our pitch as to why we believe we are better than Bobby in this regard. And so I think that's the biggest difference between us and the rest of the candidates, because Bobby Charles has had a national audience, so to speak. I believe that the biggest difference there is simply who has gotten in front of the voters the most. And I think that that's where the next 100 days will play out for the rest of us. And I believe that, if we can manage to inform enough of the voters what the difference is, it will be more than an open race. I believe Bobby will not be at the front if, in fact, we can put ourselves in front of more voters quicker.
Yeah, like I said, I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and I think getting more known, I think, makes a difference, especially with somebody like Robert. One of the other interesting factors, and I think this has come up a number of times, is that the Republican primary will be done by ranked choice voting. And do you have any thoughts as to how that's going to play in to the race?
Yeah. So ultimately, first and foremost, I'm not a fan of ranked choice voting. I don't believe that that's that's good as far as integrity issues, because ultimately what that I'll explain the process a little bit. So what that does is, after the first round, rather than leaving it at local control, once that first round is over, that power gets transferred to the Secretary of State. And so, first and foremost, I'm not a big fan of all of that power being vested in one person, let alone one person that has a governor's race, let alone one person that I already did not trust. And so
Why not? She's so trustworthy. She just only wanted to keep Trump off the ballot to protect people from themselves. Anyway, continue.
No, yes. And so again, those are very big issues that I really question whether or not we should have this power vested in the Secretary of State. But apart from that, ranked choice voting will have an impact of this election, because the fact of the matter is, at this point, no one person is going to receive 50% or more of the vote. And so what you're going to see happen is you're going to see some of these bottom tiers of people. What they're going to do is they're going to drop off, and then that your second choice candidates are then going to get those votes. And so what I think you're going to see is Bobby Charles is going to have his 30%, and he's going to have his 30% that are his first choice. They're going to be his first choice. But then what you're going to see in your second, third, fourth rounds is you're going to see candidates slowly catching up to him, and then possibly even surpassing him, because he's already reached voter saturation levels. And so that's how I see Robert Wessels' path to victory, because all of these candidates, they build on each other. And so that's where I see the real game laid out.
Okay. So you think ranked choice voting works in favor of the Wessels campaign?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note, because I think a lot of people are confused about ranked choice voting, is that, like, yeah, so when you get the ballot, you put in whoever your first choice is, and then for your second choice, you put in another candidate. If you put the same candidate you put as your first place, your first choice, if you just keep putting them all the way along, it actually means, which is what a lot of Republicans tend to do, it is
true. Yeah,
it is something that is like limiting your ability to influence the election. Again, I'm also against ranked choice voting. I don't think it's good. Like, let's have whoever gets the most votes win. But in the current situation, this is what we have. And you know, I don't think there's anything wrong with making sure that, given the current environment, that we make sure our vote goes as far as it can. And so if we pick our first choice, like, let's say you're out there and you're a Wessels person and you put Wessels as number one, if Wessels ends up being eliminated eventually because he's the lowest, then whoever you put as your number two will be the one that your vote goes to. And so you're still kind of having an ability to influence it, even if your candidate is eliminated from that process. Again, not ideal. We don't love it. We'd like to repeal it, and we'd like to get somebody in there who can, but I think it's helpful for people to understand. And Robert Wessels would like you to know, if you think Wessels has no chance in this election, rank me as number one, and then put your candidate that has a chance, in quotes, as your number two. That's what Robert is fond of saying. So, but that's an example of what you can do. Is like, that is actually one of the beauties of the fact that this does exist, is like, I think a lot of people don't vote for who they really want because they're afraid that their vote will be
quote
lost,
unquote wasted.
right?
Yeah,
Wasted. And in this situation, that's eliminated. But people are going to say it sounds a little bit like I like ranked choice voting, and that's not what I'm saying. But I'm looking at, like, this is a positive element for people who want to vote for somebody that they think might not have a chance, but they can vote for them and still, just rank and make sure that their vote goes where it will eventually go, assuming they're right about voter sentiment. But I think one of the things that I'd like to say in general is that my ideal world would be one in which whoever gets the most first place votes ends up being the person who wins, because I don't want to, like, there's danger of there being a lot of turmoil and stuff like that, and people being upset if somebody who got less than that wins. But ultimately, we don't determine how the ranked choice vote part works, unfortunately. As you said, that's the thing that we'd like to avoid as much as possible, because we don't trust good old shenanigans bellows. And we don't, but essentially, if it ends up going to ranked choice, all the ballots get sent to her, and her team tabulate.
Yeah, well, and I'll add too that not only that, it's complex and hard to understand. We've had this.
That's probably the biggest issue that with it.
Yeah, and we've had this system in place for 10 years. And ultimately, I was talking just last week to a longtime political operative who, and Robert had the same scenario actually last week too, with another, that we had to explain to them how the process worked. And if I have to explain it and it takes you more than 30 seconds to understand this, it's probably too hard and too complicated to understand. it took me quite a while to understand how exactly does this work. That it's too complicated, and let's keep it simple. Let's keep it brief. One person, one vote.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's a common sense approach, but you don't get common sense approaches from Democrats.
No. Unfortunately not.
Yeah. So, well, thank you again for everything that you guys did to try and help the Janet Beaudoin campaign, and just how you guys are always willing to lend a helping hand for other candidates running for different positions all the way up and down the ticket. We really appreciate that, because we need that kind of support and working together within our movement. A question that I've been asked, so I'll ask you, and you can say no comment, you can say whatever you want, but I've been meaning to send this on to all the candidates, but somebody reached out to the Cumberland County Republican Committee and asked the question that they wanted answered from all the candidates, is to say, if you don't win, will you support the Republican who does win the primary in the general election?
Yes, absolutely. I personally will, and Robert will. They've got to invite me to their team, but I would be more than willing to join their team if they asked me to join. Yes, unequivocally, yes.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I think, and that's, I suspected that was the answer. And I believe most of the candidates, if not all of the candidates, I would say at least most. I have my questions about a couple, which I'll keep to myself. But most of the candidates, I think, would say the same thing, that ultimately a lot of respect. Obviously, people are trying to win against each other, and so they're looking for ways to show how they're the better candidate. And so you may see some stuff that seems less positive in people's approaches. Such as the ongoing conversation about whether or not there's going to be a debate between David Jones and Bobby Charles, and the fact that Bobby Charles isn't coming to the bigger debate put on by Common Sense for Maine. People are going after Bobby in that way, and I'm not. That's not my point in bringing it up, but just that people are saying these types of things, right? But I think ultimately, and at the end of the day, whoever wins the primary, I think all the candidates are going to support and put their weight behind. And that's the thing to look at this is, like, in order to win this election, we need all hands on deck. We need to work together. Obviously, during the primary, the candidates need to do the best that they can to try and get themselves to be the one who is representing. But after that, we need to solidify around that candidate, and again, all hands on deck. And I'm really hopeful that whether it's the Wessels campaign or whoever, if somebody else wins, and the people from the Wessels campaign put their energy behind that candidate, because, like, again, that what you have been able to put together in terms of a team of volunteers and the dedication of the people behind you is incredible. And whether you win the nomination or somebody else does, and you're asked to join in and help support them, it's going to be something that's going to significantly positively affect our ability to win this election. Absolutely. So that's my comment there. So anything else that you'd like to share before we go this morning?
I don't think so. Unless you have some interesting thought you'd like to share on that.
No, I don't think I have any.
Okay.
I don't think a lot ahead. I'm just kidding, but like I kind of am a gunslinger. I don't plan a lot of this outside of, like, I might have a question or two when we come into something like I did, but mostly it's like, let's have a conversation and let's see where it goes. And I just appreciate you taking the time to come on and coming to our state to try and help turn our state red before it goes into, so that it doesn't go into California land, where people wonder if we're ever going to have an opportunity to have Republicans in control of anything. And we've got the most radical policies already, but we're the average Mainer is not nearly as radical. So I think there's hope to turn things back. And I appreciate you taking time, not just to support Robert, because that is what it is, but it's also to support the people of Maine. And so I appreciate that. Yeah,
absolutely. And I'll add too, the difference between California and Maine is very, very drastic. I believe that Maine very much has a shot. We've got to get our act together as Republicans. We've got to put forth a team effort. But the reality is, this November, we are gonna take the House, we're gonna take the Senate, and we're gonna take the governor's office if we work together as a team. if and only if we work together as a team. I believe it's possible, but we're going to have to work hard at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with that. We have to work together as a team, and I do believe it is possible. So let's get out there. So again, thank you guys so much. Thanks to the Wessels campaign and everybody who's running to working hard to try and turn this state red, or at least purple. Maybe would be some progress, please. Not the progressive progress, but like actual progress. So all right.
Yep.
Well, thank you all for watching. I'll be back on here tomorrow morning with our weekly rundown. We'll say with John Featherston. So we'll see you then. Thanks.